The transport shuttle's docking sequence with asteroid mining station Alpha 7 sounded like someone was trying to repair a symphony orchestra with a plasma torch. David Walsh winced as the mechanical couplings engaged with a series of metallic shrieks that suggested either poor maintenance or a fundamental disagreement between human and alien engineering principles. "Welcome to Alpha 7, announced the station's AI with the kind of forced enthusiasm that suggested it had been programmed by someone who'd never actually experienced enthusiasm firsthand. "Please proceed to Section C-12 for assignment briefing. Mind the artificial gravity fluctuations in corridors 7 through 15. David shouldered his toolkit and headed through the airlock, immediately noticing that Alpha 7 felt different from the purely human installations he was used to. The corridor walls curved in organic patterns rather than standard geometric layouts, and the lighting had a subtle blue-white quality that seemed designed for eyes that processed different spectrums than human vision. Section C-12 turned out to be a briefing room that looked like it had been designed by a committee composed entirely of different alien species, each with strong opinions about optimal workspace configuration. David was studying a wall panel whose purpose remained completely mysterious when the door slid open to admit someone who made him temporarily forget about mysterious wall panels entirely. She was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to hold an inner luminescence like polished crystal. Her hair was silver-white and moved as if suspended in water, while her ears rose to elegant points that marked her as Zentari, one of the galaxy's most technically gifted species. But it was her eyes that caught David's attention. Deep blue with flecks of silver that seemed to shift and dance with their own internal light. "You must be the human engineer," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the room's acoustic panels resonate softly. "I'm Kira Zh'anna." "David Walsh," he replied, trying to sound more professional than he felt. "I understand we're partnering on the quantum resonance array calibration project." Kira's expression shifted to something that might have been polite skepticism. "Yes. Though I should mention that Zentari technology requires certain, specific approaches that human engineering methods don't always accommodate." "I've worked with alien tech before," David said, patting his toolkit with confidence. "Generally speaking, if something's broken, you figure out why and fix it. Universal principles." "Universal principles," Kira repeated, her tone suggesting she found the concept amusing rather than reassuring. "We'll see." Their first assignment was in Engineering Section 7, a chamber that looked like someone had built a cathedral for worshipping particularly sophisticated mathematics. Crystalline structures grew from floor to ceiling in complex geometric patterns, each one pulsing with soft bioluminescent light that seemed to respond to Kira's presence. "The quantum resonance array," Kira explained, gesturing toward a cluster of crystals at the chamber's center, "amplifies subspace communications across the asteroid belt. But the focusing elements have been drifting out of alignment, causing signal degradation throughout the system." David approached the crystal cluster with his standard diagnostic scanner, but the readings made no sense. "These energy signatures don't match any known crystalline matrix configurations." "Because they're not purely crystalline," Kira said, moving to stand beside one of the larger formations. "Zentari focusing elements are bioelectric hybrids. They respond to specific neural wavelengths rather than mechanical adjustment." She placed her hands on the crystal's surface, and immediately the entire chamber's lighting shifted to warmer tones as the crystal began resonating in harmony with whatever bioelectric fields she was generating. David watched in fascination as patterns of light flowed through the crystalline network like thoughts made visible. "That's incredible," he said. "But how do you calibrate something that responds to brain waves rather than mechanical input?" "Very carefully," Kira replied. "And with patience. The crystals have to be guided rather than forced into alignment." David pulled out his sonic calibrator, a device that had solved alignment problems on dozens of different alien technologies. "What if we use harmonic resonance to nudge them into the correct frequency patterns?" "I wouldn't recommend," Kira began, but David was already activating the calibrator. The crystal's response was immediate and alarming. Instead of gentle realignment, the entire formation began vibrating with increasing intensity, its bioluminescent patterns shifting from harmonious flows to chaotic strobing that made the chamber's lighting flicker erratically. "Turn it off," Kira said urgently, her hands moving to different positions on the crystal's surface as she tried to calm the disrupted bioelectric patterns. David deactivated the sonic calibrator, but the damage was done. The crystal continued to pulse with unstable energy patterns, and several smaller formations throughout the chamber had begun resonating in sympathetic discord. "Well," David said as alarms began sounding throughout the engineering section, "that's not supposed to happen. Zentari crystals aren't supposed to be subjected to crude harmonic bombardment," Kira replied with impressive restraint, considering that David had just turned their delicate calibration work into what appeared to be a seizure in crystal form. Emergency protocols activated throughout the chamber, flooding the space with stabilizing energy fields that gradually calmed the disrupted crystal formations. David watched in embarrassment as Kira spent the next hour carefully coaxing the bioelectric matrices back to stable configurations using techniques that seemed more like meditation than engineering. "I'm sorry," he said when the crisis had passed and the chamber had returned to its previous state of gentle luminescence. "I didn't realize the harmonic calibrator would cause that kind of feedback. Zentari technology isn't designed for mechanical solutions," Kira explained, though her tone had softened from frustrated to merely tired. "Our systems require bioelectric synchronization. Force disrupts the neural resonance patterns that keep the crystals stable." "So how do you actually calibrate them?" Kira moved to another crystal formation, this one smaller and somehow more delicate looking than the others. "Watch." She placed her hands on the crystal's surface again, but this time David paid attention to the subtleties of her technique. Instead of pressing or manipulating the crystal directly, she seemed to be listening to it, letting her bioelectric field merge with its natural resonance patterns and making tiny adjustments that guided rather than forced the alignment process. "It's like tuning an instrument," she said softly, her concentration focused entirely on the crystal's response. "You don't force the strings to the right pitch, you listen to what they're trying to become and help them get there." David watched the crystal's patterns shift gradually toward perfect alignment, the process taking nearly 20 minutes of patient adjustment. "That's beautiful," he said, meaning it. "But also incredibly time-consuming." "Good calibration takes time," Kira replied. "Rushing the process just causes more problems later." "What if we combined approaches?" David suggested. "I could use mechanical stabilization to provide a steady foundation while you handle the bioelectric fine-tuning." Kira looked at him with what might have been cautious interest. "That might actually work. As long as you understand that Zentari systems can't be forced into configuration." "No forcing," David agreed. "Just patient cooperation between different engineering philosophies." Kira's smile was small but genuine. "We'll see, David Walsh. We'll see." 3 weeks into their partnership, David was beginning to understand why the station's previous human engineers had requested transfers after working with Zentari technology. It wasn't that the systems were poorly designed, quite the opposite. Zentari engineering was elegant, efficient, and incredibly sophisticated. The problem was that it required a completely different mindset than anything in human technical training. "The atmospheric recycling system is fluctuating again," Chief Engineer Rodriguez announced during the morning briefing, his expression suggesting he'd rather be dealing with a nice, straightforward plasma fire. "Life support is stable, but we're seeing efficiency drops that could become critical if they continue." David and Kira exchanged glances across the briefing table. The atmospheric system was one of the station's most crucial hybrid installations, combining human mechanical reliability with Zentari bioelectric optimization in ways that made troubleshooting a delicate balance between two completely different approaches to problem solving. "We'll handle it," David said with more confidence than he felt. The atmospheric control center was located deep in the station's core, surrounded by the humming machinery that kept several thousand beings breathing across multiple species requirements. The Zentari bioelectric components were integrated throughout the system like a nervous system threaded through purely mechanical infrastructure. "The pressure regulators are operating within normal parameters," David reported, checking his diagnostic displays. But the bioelectric efficiency controllers are showing instability in the carbon dioxide scrubbing cycles. Kira was already moving toward the primary control matrix, her hands hovering over the crystalline interfaces without quite touching them. The bioelectric resonance is off. Someone's been making mechanical adjustments without compensating for the neural feedback loops. Mechanical adjustments? David asked, then winced as he realized what she meant. The night shift maintenance team. They probably tried to fix the pressure fluctuations using standard procedures, which completely disrupted the bioelectric synchronization, Kira finished. The crystals are trying to compensate for mechanical changes they don't understand. David watched her begin the delicate process of reading the system's bioelectric patterns, her concentration intense as she tried to understand what the crystals were attempting to communicate. The process was fascinating but also incredibly time-consuming, and atmospheric efficiency was continuing to decline while she worked. What if I bypass the damaged control circuits? David suggested, pulling up schematics on his mobile display. I could reroute the primary flow controls through the backup mechanical systems while you handle the bioelectric recalibration. That might work, Kira said without looking up from her analysis, but you'd have to be very careful not to create feedback loops between the mechanical bypass and the crystal matrices. David was already opening access panels and pulling diagnostic cables. The bypass procedure was routine human engineering: identify the problem, isolate the faulty components, reroute through backup systems. He'd done similar repairs hundreds of times on purely human installations. The problem was that this wasn't a purely human installation. David, wait, Kira called out, but he was already initializing the bypass sequence. The atmospheric system's response was immediate and catastrophic. Instead of smooth mechanical rerouting, the sudden change in flow patterns sent shock waves through the bioelectric crystal network. Alarms began sounding as atmospheric efficiency dropped by 15% in 30 seconds, and emergency ventilation protocols activated throughout the station. Shut it down, Kira said urgently, her hands pressed against the primary control matrix as she tried to stabilize the disrupted crystal network. The mechanical bypass is forcing the crystals into configurations they can't maintain. David frantically reversed the bypass procedure, but the damage was already spreading through the system. The bioelectric crystals were oscillating wildly as they tried to compensate for the mechanical changes, creating feedback loops that were affecting atmospheric controls throughout the station. The crystals can't handle rapid mechanical transitions, Kira explained as she worked to calm the disrupted systems. They need gradual adjustment periods to maintain stable bioelectric resonance. I was trying to help, David protested, watching helplessly as his attempt at efficient problem-solving made everything worse. By forcing the system to work the way you think it should work instead of the way it's designed to work. Kira's frustration finally boiled over, her voice carrying harmonics that made the control room's acoustic panels vibrate. This is exactly what I meant about Zentari technology requiring different approaches. Different approaches, not incomprehensible mysticism. David shot back. How am I supposed to help if every time I try to apply standard engineering solutions, the crystals have some kind of breakdown? Because standard engineering solutions don't work with bioelectric systems. Kira turned away from the control matrix to face him directly, her blue eyes flashing with silver highlights that suggested strong emotions. You can't just hammer away at delicate crystalline networks and expect them to respond like mechanical components. I wasn't hammering. I was applying systematic diagnostic procedures to isolate system failures. You were forcing mechanical solutions onto bioelectric problems. Kira's voice rose another octave, her hands gesturing toward the still fluctuating crystal displays. Mine isn't that flexible, David. The bioelectric resonance patterns can't be forced into alignment. Stop trying to make them work like human machinery. The control room fell silent except for the gradually stabilizing hum of atmospheric systems returning to normal operation. David stared at Kira, realizing that her outburst hadn't just been about engineering procedures. There was something deeper in her frustration, something about fundamental incompatibilities that went beyond technical approaches. I'm trying to understand, he said quietly. But every time I attempt to contribute, I end up making things worse. Kira's expression softened slightly, though the silver highlights in her eyes still suggested strong emotions. The problem is that you keep trying to make Zentari technology work like human technology instead of learning how it actually functions. So teach me, David said. Show me how to work with bioelectric systems instead of against them. Before Kira could respond, the control room's communication system activated with Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice carrying official displeasure. Engineering teams Chen and Walsh to administration immediately. We need to discuss your atmospheric system incident. David and Kira looked at each other across the control room, the weight of professional consequences settling over their personal argument. Their inability to work together effectively wasn't just causing technical problems, it was threatening their assignments and potentially their careers. We're in trouble, David said. Yes, Kira agreed, but her tone had shifted from anger to something that might have been determination. But maybe that's exactly what we need. As they walked toward administration, David found himself acutely aware of Kira's presence beside him, the way her bioelectric fields created subtle harmonies with the station's systems, the careful precision of her movements, the intelligence that approached problems from angles his human training had never considered. Their professional friction was real, but so was the undeniable attraction that made their arguments feel more like passion than mere disagreement. The question was whether they could learn to channel that energy into collaboration before their incompatibilities destroyed both their partnership and their growing personal connection. Chief Engineer Rodriguez's office felt like a tribunal chamber where careers went to die. David sat across from Kira at a conference table that seemed designed to emphasize how much trouble they were in, while Rodriguez reviewed their incident reports with the expression of someone contemplating the heat death of the universe. So, Rodriguez said finally, setting down his tablet with deliberate precision, in the past 3 weeks, you two have caused crystal cascade failures, atmospheric efficiency crashes, and what the night shift is calling the Great Lighting Seizure of Section 12. Should I be impressed by your consistency or concerned about your competence? David opened his mouth to defend their efforts, but Kira spoke first. The problem is integration methodology, sir. Human mechanical engineering and Zentari bioelectric systems require coordinated approaches that neither of our species has fully developed. Which is exactly why we assigned you to work together, Rodriguez replied. The theory was that combined human Zentari techniques would solve problems that neither approach could handle alone. Instead, you're creating new categories of system failures. We're learning, David said, though even he could hear how weak that sounded. Learning is expensive when it involves life support systems, Rodriguez said grimly. Which brings me to your options. Option 1, you request transfers to separate assignments and we go back to having human and Zentari engineers work on completely different systems. David felt something sink in his chest at the thought of losing his partnership with Kira, even if that partnership was currently defined by professional friction and increasingly personal arguments. Option 2, Rodriguez continued, you figure out how to work together effectively, starting with the primary quantum resonance array that's been scheduled for complete recalibration tomorrow. It's a complex job that requires both mechanical precision and bioelectric sensitivity, which means you'll either succeed spectacularly or fail in ways that make your previous incidents look like minor inconveniences. Kira straightened in her chair, her bioelectric field creating subtle harmonics with the office's electronic systems. We'll take option 2, sir. We will? David asked, surprised by her confidence. Yes, Kira said, turning to look at him with an expression that combined determination with something that might have been challenge. Because I think our problem isn't incompatibility, it's that we've been fighting instead of collaborating. Rodriguez looked between them with the skepticism of someone who'd seen too many partnerships implode in spectacular fashion. You have 24 hours to prove that theory. If the resonance array recalibration fails, you're both getting transferred to separate stations where your incompatibilities won't threaten critical infrastructure. Walking back toward the engineering sections, David found himself acutely aware of the stakes they were facing. Are you sure about this? He asked. Because honestly, I'm not convinced we can work together without causing more disasters. That's because you're still thinking about this as a competition between human and Zentari approaches, Kira replied. What if instead of trying to prove whose methods are better, we focused on making them complement each other? They spent the rest of the day in Kira's quarters, studying technical specifications and developing what they optimistically called integrated engineering protocols. David learned about bioelectric resonance patterns and the subtle feedback loops that allowed Zentari crystals to maintain stable configurations. Kira studied human mechanical engineering principles and the systematic diagnostic approaches that made human technology so reliable. The key insight, Kira said as they worked through their fourth pot of coffee-equivalent stimulants, is that bioelectric systems need stable foundations to work properly. Your mechanical engineering could provide that stability. And your bioelectric sensitivity could handle the fine adjustments that mechanical systems can't manage, David added. Like combining a solid foundation with delicate craftsmanship. By morning, they had developed a comprehensive approach that integrated human mechanical stability with Zentari bioelectric precision. The theory was elegant, but David knew that theories and practical application were often separated by the kind of disasters that ended careers. The primary quantum resonance array occupied an entire chamber at the station's core, a crystalline cathedral that pulsed with the accumulated communications traffic of dozens of asteroid mining facilities. The recalibration would require adjusting hundreds of individual crystal elements while maintaining perfect synchronization across the entire network. Remember, Kira said as they began the preliminary diagnostics, mechanical changes first, then bioelectric adjustments. Let the crystals stabilize between each phase. David started with structural analysis, using his diagnostic equipment to map the array's physical configuration and identify elements that needed realignment. Instead of rushing toward solutions, he focused on creating stable conditions that would support Kira's more delicate work. Crystal Matrix 7 needs mechanical stabilization, he reported. The support framework has shifted by 0.3 degrees, which is affecting the bioelectric resonance patterns. I can compensate for that, Kira replied, her hands already positioned near the affected crystal cluster, but I'll need the mechanical adjustment to be gradual. No sudden changes. David made the structural corrections slowly, watching his instruments for any sign that the mechanical changes were disrupting the bioelectric patterns. To his relief, Kira's presence seemed to calm the crystals even as he adjusted their physical positions, her bioelectric field providing stability that allowed the system to adapt to the changes. That's working, Kira said with obvious satisfaction. The crystals are accepting the mechanical adjustments because they can sense that the changes are supporting rather than fighting their natural resonance patterns. They move through the array systematically, David providing mechanical stability while Kira handled bioelectric fine-tuning. What had previously been a source of conflict between their approaches became the foundation for unprecedented precision. David's mechanical adjustments gave Kira the stable platform she needed for delicate bioelectric work, while her sensitivity to crystal responses guided his mechanical interventions toward configurations that supported rather than disrupted the system's natural patterns. Efficiency is up 18% over baseline, David reported as they completed the final calibration sequence. Signal clarity is improved across all frequency bands, and the bioelectric resonance patterns are showing perfect stability. Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice came through the communication system with what might have been surprise. Confirmed from the command center. Whatever you two did, it's working better than the original specifications projected. Kira looked at David across the crystalline array, her expression combining professional satisfaction with something more personal. We did it. We did, David agreed, feeling something shift in the dynamics between them. Though I have to admit, I'm still not sure I completely understand how bioelectric resonance works. And I still don't fully grasp the principles behind mechanical stress distribution, Kira replied. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we don't have to understand everything about each other's approaches, we just have to trust them enough to make them work together. David felt the truth of that observation settling into something deeper than professional collaboration. Their partnership had evolved beyond simply combining different engineering techniques, they had learned to complement each other in ways that created something neither could achieve alone. "So," he said, "what do we do for our next assignment?" Kira's smile held promise and mischief in equal measure. "I think we see how far this integration approach can take us. After all, we've barely begun to explore what's possible when human and Zentari capabilities work in perfect synchronization." The words carried implications that extended far beyond engineering projects, and David found himself looking forward to discovering exactly what perfect synchronization with Kira might mean. 6 months later, David and Kira's reputation as the galaxy's most effective human Zentari engineering team had earned them a consultation assignment that would define the future of interspecies technical cooperation. The Helix Nebula Mining Consortium was facing cascade failures across 17 connected facilities, and conventional approaches by both human and Zentari engineers had failed to resolve the interconnected system breakdown. 6 months later, David and Kira's reputation as the galaxy's most effective human Zentari engineering team had earned them a consultation assignment that would define the future of interspecies technical cooperation. The Helix Nebula Mining Consortium was facing cascade failures across 17 connected facilities, and conventional approaches by both human and Zentari engineers had failed to resolve the interconnected system breakdowns. The problem, David explained to the emergency response briefing, is that each facility was designed using different species engineering principles. Human mechanical systems, Zentari bioelectric networks, Andrillian quantum matrices, and Vorthan plasma conduits are all trying to work together without any coordinated integration protocols. Kira activated the holographic display showing the cascade failure patterns. The systems are actually fighting each other. Each species technology is trying to optimize the network according to its own principles, creating conflicts that cascade through the entire infrastructure. Emergency Coordinator Thane, a grizzled veteran who looked like he'd personally witnessed the birth and death of several star systems, studied their analysis with obvious concern. "How long before total system failure?" 18 hours, David said grimly. "After that, life support fails across all 17 facilities simultaneously. And you think you can fix this?" David and Kira exchanged glances that carried months of shared experience learning to work in perfect synchronization. "We think we can teach the different systems to work with each other instead of against each other," Kira said. "But it will require unprecedented coordination between mechanical, bioelectric, quantum, and plasma technologies." The primary control facility was a chaotic maze of incompatible technologies that had been connected through brute force rather than intelligent integration. Warning lights flashed in patterns that corresponded to 4 different species emergency protocols, while alarms played discordant harmonies that suggested the various systems couldn't even agree on how to indicate distress. "It's like someone took instruments from 4 different orchestras and tried to make them play the same song without a conductor," David observed, studying the conflicting diagnostic readings. "Or with 4 different conductors all trying to lead at the same time," Kira added, her hands hovering over the Zentari bioelectric interfaces while avoiding the Andrillian quantum matrices that could disrupt her neural patterns. They had developed their integration approach through months of trial and occasionally spectacular error, learning that successful multi-species collaboration required understanding not just what each technology did, but how it approached problems. Human systems valued reliability and systematic progression. Zentari networks prioritized sensitivity and adaptive response. Andrillian quantum matrices operated on probability calculations that seemed chaotic to linear thinkers. Vorthan plasma conduits functioned through controlled chaos that appeared destructive but actually achieved remarkable efficiency. "The key insight," David said as they began mapping the facility's system interactions, "is that each technology has optimal operating conditions that we need to create and maintain. Like creating different environmental zones where each system can function according to its own principles," Kira agreed, "while establishing translation protocols that allow them to communicate effectively." David started with the human mechanical systems, providing the stable foundation that all the other technologies could build upon. His diagnostic equipment mapped the physical infrastructure and identified points where mechanical reliability could support more exotic technological approaches. Kira worked with the Zentari bioelectric networks, her neural patterns guiding the crystalline matrices toward configurations that could interface with both mechanical stability and quantum probability calculations. Her bioelectric field created harmonizing influences that helped calm the conflicting resonance patterns between different systems. Andrillion quantum matrices online, reported Dr. Vex High, the facility's quantum specialist, as the probability calculations began stabilizing around the foundation David and Kira had created. Uncertainty fluctuations are within acceptable parameters. Vorthan plasma conduits responding, added engineer Gorthake, whose species' approach to controlled chaos was finally finding stable operating conditions within the integrated framework. Energy distribution efficiency approaching optimal levels. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Instead of 4 incompatible systems fighting for dominance, the integrated network began functioning as a unified whole where each technology contributed its strengths while being supported by the other's capabilities. Human mechanical reliability provided stable foundations, Zentari bioelectric sensitivity handled adaptive responses, Andrillion quantum matrices optimized probability calculations, and Vorthan plasma conduits managed energy distribution with spectacular efficiency. Cascade failure risk eliminated, Emergency Coordinator Thane announced as the warning systems throughout the facility shifted to normal operational status. All 17 facilities showing stable operations with efficiency improvements across all systems. David looked at Kira across the control room, feeling the satisfaction of successful collaboration that had become one of the most important aspects of his life. Their partnership had evolved far beyond professional necessity into something that combined deep mutual respect with personal connection that transcended species boundaries. "So what's our next impossible project?" he asked. "Actually," Coordinator Thane interrupted, "I have a proposal for you both. The Galactic Engineering Council is establishing a new multi-species integration program, and they want you to head the development team. You'd be traveling between systems, teaching other engineers how to achieve the kind of coordination you've demonstrated here." Kira's bioelectric field created gentle harmonics with the facility's now stable systems, her expression combining professional interest with personal excitement. "We'd be working together permanently. As the galaxy's first official interspecies engineering partnership," Thane confirmed. "Though I should warn you that the job comes with challenges. You'd be dealing with engineers from dozens of different species, each convinced that their approaches are superior to everyone else's." David laughed, remembering his first disastrous attempts to force human mechanical solutions onto Zentari bioelectric systems. "Been there. Done that. Nearly destroyed several critical systems in the process. The difference is that now we know how to teach patience and integration instead of just forcing compatibility," Kira added. "How to help different approaches complement each other rather than compete." As they prepared to leave the facility, David reflected on how much had changed since their first awkward attempts at collaboration. Kira's initial frustration with his mechanical approach to delicate systems had taught him that the best solutions often required patience and sensitivity rather than force. His systematic diagnostic methods had given her the stable foundations she needed to achieve unprecedented precision with bioelectric adjustments. "You know," he said as they watched the successfully integrated systems humming with perfect coordination, "I never did properly apologize for that atmospheric control disaster." "Which one?" Kira asked with mock innocence. "The efficiency crash, the ventilation failure, or the one where you managed to make the air recycling system play symphonies in 3 different species' musical scales simultaneously?" "All of them. But especially for not understanding that forcing solutions never works as well as learning to work with natural patterns." Kira stepped closer, her bioelectric field creating subtle harmonies with his own nervous system in ways that still amazed him after months of partnership. "I never apologized for not being patient enough to teach you about bioelectric systems instead of just getting frustrated when you didn't understand them intuitively." "Maybe that's what we're good at," David said, taking her hand and feeling the gentle electric tingle that marked their connection. "Learning from our mistakes and turning incompatibilities into strengths." "Perfect synchronization," Kira agreed, her smile holding promises of both professional and personal adventures that would take them across the galaxy. Though I reserve the right to remind you that some systems really aren't flexible enough for your more enthusiastic mechanical interventions." David laughed, pulling her closer as they prepared to begin their new role as teachers of interspecies collaboration. "And I